billionaire class. You can't have it all.
Welcome to the Evolution of Now. I'm your host, Jordan, and with me are your beautiful co-host, Christopher Robinson. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, I'm beautiful? Really? You really think?
On the inside.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
That's
How you?
okay.
And
beautiful on the inside.
And also, we're joined by our even beautifuler co-host, Michael.
Is that
How you
even a
doing, Mike?
word?
You know what?
It is now.
That's the closest I've gotten. I've been to having a love life for about 3 years now.
Hey, Mike, we're in the same boat, so deal with it.
Damn.
Yeah. Well,
Now I feel left out.
By the
welcome
way,
to the
Jordan,
loser
screw
tree.
you.
The Lonely Hearts Club. So we are all joined here today to discuss a very, very important topic that growing up, I've heard tons, probably hundreds of misconceptions of, and that's I guess we can call them quote unquote entitlement programs, quote unquote social programs, quote unquote welfare programs, and the list goes on. So I'm really excited to talk about this, guys. How about you?
It's a good topic. Yeah.
it's a big one and an important one because there's so much bullshit about it.
Yeah.
Totally. And also just to cue the audience in too, just about how we're going to structure this. So in the beginning, we're going to talk a lot about the American entitlement system, quote unquote, and then also kind of weaved into that, and probably a little bit on the back end as well. We're going to talk about the UK entitlement system.
Yeah, because who cares about them, honestly? But
they're just some backwater country. No one really gives a fuck about them.
Seriously, I mean, come on.
Oh man. So I guess we can start things off. And I actually want to just go over a general history on how entitlement programs kind of started in America, which of course a lot of you already know, but that was with FDR. When he was elected, under, he proposed something called the New Deal, which was to put people back in work, following the recession in the 1930s. And so, that was doing well. And 2 years later, they started to realize that, look, the New Deal there's a lot of people it's not reaching. And that's, like the older folk and children and widows and people with certain impairments that they felt needed aid as well. So 2 years after the New Deal, Roosevelt signed something into law called the Social Security Act, which essentially was the beginning of what we know Social Security is to be today, which is basically if you're 65 or older, at 65 years old, that's when you'll start collecting retirement benefits, which is incurred by a payroll tax over time. And the thing is, he passed it in a very specific way because America was the mindset was very individualistic, kind of what sure, we haven't really grown past that stage, but and so because of that, he thought, look, people aren't, even though Social Security is a transfer of wealth in a sense, because it's being paid for by current people in the workforce, we need to convince people that no, this is a system built with your money. This is a pension system. Essentially, we're just collecting the money that you have earned in taxes and paying it forward once you finally retire. And even though that wasn't the case, that's what he sold it as, and it passed in Congress. And so prior to it passing, half of all elderly were living in poverty. It was the highest group of people living in poverty at the time. Post the Social Security Act. It finally passed, and by 1945, it went down to it went down to 35%. And now today it is less than 9%, which is they're actually the lowest, percentile and group of people who live in poverty. Actually, now children are the highest at 20%. So,
that's a warning stat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure and who knows, I'm sure it's going up. But yeah, I just wanted to kick things off with that. And, yeah, so the floodgate open. Chris, Michael.
Yeah. Social Security.
So it's a very successful program.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Definitely. Very, very important program. And
by the way,
but,
sorry,
you can go, Mike.
Okay. As a clarification, do you mean like you pay into a thing over time, then you get it when you're 65, or is that? Because over here you get a state pension, and it's just like you pay a tax, and then you get a set amount of money after you retire.
Right. So I mean, essentially, it was sold to the public as as if the government was like, when you're younger, the government's just collecting your taxes. And when you as an individual get older, the taxes that you have had taken out are essentially given back to you, which isn't the case. Because basically, there's about a 30%, the amount of money that a Social Security recipient gets is about 30% higher than what they put into while they were working. And it's like, so what is that money coming from? Oh yeah, it's coming from the current people working and current younger people working. And so essentially it's kind of a welfare program in a sense, because it's a transfer of the wealth that's going to people who aren't contributing to that, to the taxes that are going to them essentially. So yeah, that's it.
But is it like a set amount they get, or is it, does it depend on how much they paid in?
It essentially depends on how much they paid in. So like every month or so, they'll receive a letter in the mail saying, oh yeah, so far, this is how much you'll receive once you retire. And it keeps kind of, fluctuating up until the time they retire. And that's not actually a really good gauge in terms of how much they'll receive in Social Security, because it's essentially dependent on how much is available to pay out to the specific person. And really, Social Security checks on average are about $1,500 a month.
Okay. I just wondered, because over here it's a set amount to get per month, I think it is. Sorry, Chris.
Sorry. I saw a slightly different stat, at least. Maybe this is slightly different from Social Security. It's a supplemental security program. Maybe it's a slightly different program then. All right.
Yeah, it is.
Because, I was looking at that for some of the numbers for tonight. That program, just to go over it real quick, is it has 8.4 million recipients, and 7.3 million of those people are blind or disabled, and all they get per month is $536.
Right.
Now, I guess Social Security in itself, like you said, gives $1,500 something on average per month to the people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it's higher because, of course, it's for older people. They're not, you don't intend them to be working. Supplemental, it's just, of course, an add-on to what they're already making.
And I believe one of the requirements for, I think, even Social Security that I've heard of in the past, at the very least, is you have to basically liquidate all of your assets. You can't own anything anymore. You have to basically sell everything off and then go through all of your savings, and then you can actually get Social Security. I believe that was the program, or something else entirely, or
I can't remember if they did it or not. But the Tories were thinking about essentially if you get put into a nursing home by the state, you'd put your house up as collateral to pay for it.
All right.
I can't remember if they actually did it or not.
I'm not sure.
Well,
It's either that or Medicare that's the case, though. I can't entirely remember which one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Medicare has has certain requirements. So it could possibly be Medicare. That sounds more plausible. But I think the real heart of this episode actually is just talking about the amount of. So we know at this point in time, the Republican Party, their goal after passing a tax bill, a tax cut to corporations and the wealthy that are going to add $1.5 trillion to the overall deficit. After doing that, actually even before passing it and now after passing it, they were talking about, hey, this budget is too ghastly. It's taking up too much space. We need to reduce it. And how do we reduce that? We cut our federal aid programs. And so that's the big, and I think that's the real crux of this, is that how bad they want to cut this. And apparently they've been wanting to cut federal aid programs for a very long time. And except, the public support for these programs is more than half on both sides of the aisle. And so, yeah, so I that's it. I mean, Speaker Paul Ryan has, had come out and said that, December 6th, actually, this was post the tax bill passing, saying, quote, "We're going to have to get back next year at entitlement reform, which is how you tackle the debt and the deficit." And then he continues to say, "I think the president is understanding that choice and competition works everywhere in healthcare." That's interesting. "Especially in Medicare. This has been my big thing for many, many years. I think it's the biggest entitlement we've got to reform." That's some fucked up shit. Yeah.
The thing is, Medicare is really efficient.
Right.
It won't be anymore. Well, yeah, I mean, like you did say, these guys have been trying to cut these things for years. This has been the mantra of the right wing in this country for decades now. Cut taxes and cut entitlement programs, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
So they.
Sorry.
Damn it, Michael.
I thought you were finished.
Michael, yes.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say it's quite relevant for us as well, because this winter, every winter, I don't know how close it is in America, but every winter it gets really cold and lots of people get very sick, as you'd expect.
Imagine that.
And so every winter the NHS is under so much strain. This winter's been terrible, with reports of people not being able to get to bed, and so they've had to sit on trolleys in the corridors, and doctors in A&Es describing it as third world conditions. People being stuck in an ambulance outside the A&E because there's just nowhere to put them.
Wow.
Yeah, really bad.
Yeah,
that is bad.
It's why there's been so much about the guy that manages the NHS has been promoted. But that's a separate topic. Don't get me fucking started. And Theresa May's like, "Oh, well, we never saw this coming, really." Yeah.
Republicans and Tories are pretty much aligned in the idea that they need to cut these programs, right?
They're very similar. Yeah. They want to sell the NHS off, and so Jeremy Hunt wrote a book saying that if you want to privatise the NHS, people don't just let you privatise the NHS; they love the NHS. What you're going to have to do is defund it and make the quality really bad. So then people say, the quality is really bad. We've got to sell it off. We've got to privatise.
Huh. That
and then they made him health
eerily
secretary.
Familiar to over here.
So what they do is they increase the funding every year, not keeping up with inflation. Mm-hmm. So the funding is actually level inflation, but they increase it. Then they can say they increase it every year. The Office of National Statistics in this country has had to tell them to stop saying that they've increased the funding every year because it's really misleading.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But yeah, swinging it back around to Medicare, the NHS is actually a really efficient system, much more efficient than a private system. Not sure what point was for that.
And Mike, you're a beneficiary of the NHS, right?
Yes. Yeah, I have a transplanted kidney, so.
It's awesome. And I guess in service has been pretty pretty good or decent?
I'm not the best judge because my condition is one of them where I can get really bad very quickly. Mm-hmm. I generally get a better treatment than most.
I see.
But that being said, I've not been in A&E for quite a while now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Doesn't sound like it's working very well. I'm just going to say. Those people that actually need the care really badly, getting the care that they need. Ugh.
They've cancelled every non-emergency procedure this January.
Wow.
To free up staff to handle the winter.
Yeah.
That's how bad it's got.
That is pretty interesting.
Yeah. And the reasons are to do with them defunding the primary care. So then obviously people can't get to the GPs, they can't get to the walk-in centres, so they have to go to A&E. Then A&E can't handle the stress. Yep. But I derailed that a little bit.
It's okay. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, just to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, it was the same reason. Well, with the Affordable Care Act, the reason for why it was actually going to decrease the deficit over time is that more people were going to see the doctor during regular visits to catch the sicknesses before they churn into something much bigger, which increases the amount of money that it takes to care for those kind of illnesses are much larger than, say, it would have been if they got just a specific shot or.
If you go into the GP with an infection early, it's one round of antibiotics and an hour's GP time at most. If you go into A&E with an infection, that can be, A&E time, an ambulance, a doctor for a few hours, a bed overnight, fluids, stronger antibiotics, can be all sorts of things. It can run into thousands.
Interesting. And I just wanted to add to that, like you were saying about how they keep on cutting the program, and then I'm saying, you see that? It's failing. That's why we need to privatize it. And it's the exact same thing over here with pretty much everything. They defund the post office. You see that? The post office isn't doing very well anymore. That's why we need to privatize mail and all that.
The free market does much better with twice the money.
Yeah. You see that? Our schools are failing. They don't tell you that they've been cutting them for decades and decades, and if not, just stagnating wages and telling teachers, you're not getting any raises anytime soon. Sorry, not going to happen. And so in that way, inflation keeps on happening, so money is worth less. When inflation happens, money is worth less. And when you're making the exact same amount of money and inflation is going up, you are essentially making less money. And so this is a very big problem with a lot of schools and everything. And they keep on cutting the funding or stagnating the funding and telling people you can't get any more raises. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. And then they have the audacity later on to see, like, you see that the schools are failing. They don't have, they're not working very well anymore. Yeah, because you fucking defunded them for the last 30 years,
Because they've got no bloody money.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then they expect the public to entrust a more privatized system in order to, fix all of the ailments these systems have.
Yeah.
Then you say, no, a public system works better. And you say, well, look at the current system. He's like, no, but the current system isn't what I want.
Right. And, and that's only one message that conservatives try to push in terms of why these programs need to end. Another one is fraud. And that one actually permeates a bunch of working class people, actually. Like, it becomes a part of their rhetoric as well.
It's very common over here, too.
Really?
Yeah, working people, all these welfare frauds, isn't it? Just taking stuff from hard-working people, whatever. I have some stats on that.
Hey, so do I. You gonna say, Chris?
I was just gonna say, we have a very interesting, story about a famous one of those here.
Yes,
kind of like the only one that I've ever heard of, really. But,
at least to that level.
Yeah.
That's. Did you want to leave that up, Chris?
I mean, if you wanted to do it, Jordan, you can totally do it because it's your show this week. I'm not gonna step on your toes here.
Sure. Well, if I miss anything, fill it in. So essentially, what Chris is. Oh no. Oh, okay. Then go back. So, but essentially, what Chris is referring to, and after we tell this story, we'll get to the stats. But so yeah, what you're referring to is the story of a Miss Linda Taylor, which is not a household name, and well, maybe if you're from Chicago, it is. But essentially, this was a woman that helmed in Chicago, Illinois, that was a fraud of epic proportions. Essentially, she became the poster. Woody, what's the term?
I guess
the
poster child.
The poster child of a welfare fraud in the United States, and it was actually cited by Ronald Reagan when he was running in 1976, and up until he became president in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So essentially, within the 1970s, she was known essentially for taking advantage of Social Security, of unemployment, of
among other things,
of disability checks and money that goes towards the widows of deceased veterans. And essentially it racked up to the point where, according to actually, Chris, do you actually know that figure specifically? Was it close to 1 million? I know that's what they said, but I knew there was one different than that.
Yeah, that's the figures that Ronald Reagan was posting. Basically, during his election rhetoric, he would say that she basically took about $1 million in welfare and entitlement programs and everything. I don't have the stat in front of me right now of how much she actually took, and I don't actually think they had a specific figure. What they did have, though, was how much they were able to prove in court was only about $8,000. Is all right. That they really got from her in the courts. And they were saying, though, it's very, very easy that she took a lot more than that. They just don't have the specific figures at all, and that was all they were able to really prove in court at the time.
Right. And of course, she would also do things such as she would stage burglaries and call up the police and say, hey, they stolen. This is one example in the 1975. A burglar just came in. They stole $14,000 in fur and jewelry and cash, but thankfully it's all insured, so I can reap all that back eventually. Yeah. And so this was like one of her staples. She did this on multiple occasions.
Oh yeah, the same exact thing too. Yeah, like you said, there was one time where she claimed $14,000 in jewelry and furs, and then there was another time a few years later where she said $17,000 in furs and jewelry. And what she was doing was to get the insurance money, she needed a police report. So that's why she would call the cops in and get them in there. She would get their police report and then go to the insurance company and say, yeah, pay me. And they were like, all right, whatever. So she was not only a welfare fraud, but she was also an insurance fraud and a number of other things.
Yeah, she would change her identity. She used up to 80 names.
Do you have anything to add, Michael? I'm sorry.
It's quite impressive, 80 names. When are you keeping track of all of them?
Yeah, I mean, they said that she was like, they've never seen anything like it before. She's very crazy, very detailed.
Yeah.
But basically, that right there was a big moment in American politics, her story, because conservatives essentially picked that cherry picked that case and maligned all welfare recipients as possible, possible quote unquote people that are trying to fraud the system that they're potentially trying to benefit from. So,
welfare queens, essentially, yeah.
Exactly. Which Ronald Reagan did not coin. The Chicago Tribune, a writer for the Chicago Tribune, did, as contrary to belief.
Yeah, he just eventually started using it after that point. Yeah, he might have even exaggerated some numbers. Like, there were reports that she went by 80 plus different names. Ronald Reagan brought that up to over 100 names. She did use multiple addresses. There were at least 50 in Chicago alone that she used. Mm-hmm. One thing that I heard recently, actually, there's this other podcast called The Dollop, and they do comedic history readings and everything, and they actually had an episode on her, and I just heard it the other day, and this lady was insane. She actually would go sometimes to hospitals and kidnap children. This lady, she did this in part to actually defraud the welfare system, because then she'd say, "Oh, I have 18 children," and she would get paid by these insurance or the government because of that. And so she was kidnapping children. There's even a possibility that she helped kill a lady at one point, actually. She, at one point, was into voodoo, and she was a voodoo priestess or something like that. I don't remember what the exact title was, but she got in with this one lady. She moved in with this lady who had, like, 3 children, and she actually started poisoning this lady. One of her things was she predicted that this lady was going to die in a few months. And she actually made it happen by poisoning this lady to death over time, And after that, she became the sole guardian of those children. And like, this lady was nuts, man.
Right.
That.
Yeah.
Mike, you're impressed.
And that's just scraping the surface, man.
This is really clever. I just wish it wasn't evil.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is her story. It influences, and maybe the spreading of the story by conservatives influences the way people talk about welfare. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to a woman at my job, and she was saying how the problem with welfare are people taking advantage of it. All these people frauding. They get thousands of dollars in money from welfare, and they drive their fancy Cadillacs. And it's interesting that that little portion right there, the fancy Cadillac, was interesting because in this article about Linda Taylor, she actually was known to drive her Cadillac to like the public aid office to pick up her check. Yeah. And so like she my coworker may not have even known that she was citing the story about Linda Taylor, but in fact she was. It's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the conservatives didn't even have to actually exaggerate this lady's story, because she really was that awful. But they did anyway, yeah. They still inflated the numbers regardless. And it's really sad to really look into it, because, yeah, there was no reason they needed to add more names or more addresses or how much she actually took from the government or anything, but they did anyway. And they got the greatest gift they could possibly get with this lady on trying to cut these programs, because this was a cold, hard case that they can actually point to and say, you see that? This lady is taking us for every penny that we have. She's driving Cadillacs. She's getting all kinds of money from the system. And it just made it easy for them to demonize this kind of behavior, you know?
Right. And people like her. I mean, she was a black woman. So,
she was a very light-skinned black woman. And in that article, too, they actually even go into that she could have potentially passed off as Asian, white, or a very light-skinned black woman. So, like, she was just in, like, the perfect position, I guess, to screw over a lot of people, you know?
Right.
She can take anyone from any ethnic group, I guess is the take there. And she did really screw over a lot of people, you know? She was married, I think, 7 or 8 times, too.
Yeah, she was 8 times.
And a few of them she was married to at the same time, and they didn't know about each other, so, yeah.
To look at some wider statistics, people apparently believe, a poll predicted that people believe 27% of the welfare budget is claimed fraudulently in the UK. It turns out that the actual number, do you want to have a guess?
2.
So you said people believe it's 28%?
People believe it's 27%.
27.
It might even be less than 2%, isn't it? That's my guess. What's your guess,
That's what
Jordan?
I'm going to. I'm going to go with that because that's how it is over here in the US.
Yeah, it's 0.8% is actually the claim fraudulent.
0.8%? Yeah.
And most of that is a fuck up on the part of the government, not the claimant.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually, that's something we wanted to bring up on our end too, actually. But go on.
That's an interesting parallel then.
Yeah.
Go on, mate.
But yeah, to look at wider statistics, actually benefit fraud is extremely rare. Especially benefit fraud on the part of the person. And yet we have this massive apparatus set up to combat benefit fraud.
Yeah.
And one has to ask, what's the point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Conservatives, they have this thing where they make up, they conjure up these make-believe villains and, that they need to address by, either, cutting something down or increasing something. So, like, for instance, in the U.S., immigration, even though it's at a negative, even though more people are leaving than they're coming in, we still have Donald Trump saying that we need to build a $1 billion wall.
We need to build a wall. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be big. It's going to be great.
Exactly.
The cost estimate's quite like 15 billion or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Billions. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, like you said, Chris, even over here in the U.S., and actually, Mike, I actually like how you had this stat on what people thought, this statistic was. But yeah, like over here in the U.S., it's less than 2%. And also, like you said, it's due to, bureaucracy. So like, a lot of that is these people receiving this are illegible or, their payment calculation errors. So it's not it's not people going out of their way to fault the system. For, the overwhelming majority of the tiny percentage, of, error that's within these budgets are accounted to bureaucratic error. So we just completely, trounced over the argument that fraud is the reason why we need to cut these programs or quote unquote reform them.
And not just that fraud is the reason why we're in deficit for some reason, somehow.
Yeah.
Right.
And even if we cut down on all of the fraud in these programs, that would come nowhere close in all reality to ever, cutting down our shortfalls on deficit. So
right, yeah, we I believe we were in the U.S. $21 trillion in debt. In debt, and let's just see here. So, the TAMF, which stands for let me see, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is the welfare program that a lot of people are talking about when they talk about welfare, allots for about $31 billion of the total overall budget. And our budget is, at least in 2017 was over $4 trillion. So that's small little sliver of the total overall budget. A lot of people, the problem is a lot of people don't even know where the budget is going in the first place. They don't know the pie chart, in terms of, what accounts for what. And so they just,
Which program was that again? I'm sorry.
The temporary assistance for needy families.
All right. Yeah, I also had an interesting stat on that you might be surprised on. Temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, is what a lot of people call it. In 2016, there were 2.8 million recipients of TANF. Of that 2.8 million recipients, 2.1 million of those were children.
Jeez.
So, yeah. These children are just, they're just criminals, They're just defrauding the system, all these kids, right?
Right. But that figure just proves the point of why that program exists. And of course, it's on a block grant, so that just enables states to kind of create their own requirements, which, is not always good.
Yeah.
But but like you said, this is the temporary assistance for needy families. You have to have children in order to qualify for this assistance. So yes, people who are beneficiaries of TAMF are people who in terms of requirement, actually need it.
Yeah. So TANF.
So cutting it, you're just taking money from people who need it.
You're taking money, especially from children. If you are a right winger in this country and all you care about is family values and the children, and we can't have abortions because think of the children, we need to protect the children, and you want to cut TANF, you're dooming so many children by cutting these programs that it's absurd how many children are taking, advantage of this program out of the total. That's crazy. 2.1 out of 2.8 million people in the program are children. How could you possibly, care about children and then also want to cut these programs that help predominantly children? I just don't get it. Unless maybe that's just not the goal. Maybe what you actually care about is your stupid, your religion and tax cuts for yourself, and you don't really care about the children. You just say you do.
Right.
I wonder what it is.
Yeah. And TANF is anemic as it is. I mean, I have something here from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and it states that, quote, in 2016, for every 100 families in poverty, only 23 received cash assistance from TANF, down from 68 families when TANF was first enacted in 1996.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's even a stat here from The Balance that I cite that one statistic on TANF that says, there are 7.1 million families living in poverty, and only 2.8 million of them are recipients of TANF.
Yep, exactly.
So yeah, it's most of the people in poverty do not take advantage of TANF. Even though they most likely should be, and
that's a similar one here as well. A lot of benefits are underclaimed because people who would be able to claim them either don't know about them, or the bureaucracy to getting them is so much that they just don't bother.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest reason why a lot of people don't do it is just the hurdles you have to jump through to get these programs. And then couple on top of that, most of these families that are in poverty, I guarantee you they're working a few jobs, and they don't even have the time to go to these offices to jump through the hoops. So they don't take advantage of these systems. They just find a third and fourth and fifth job to try and make ends meet. And they're so overworked, and yet they still can't pay the bills, and they're still in poverty. And with this program, TANF, here's another stat for you. On average, a 3-person family received $429 a month in benefits in 2015. So that's really not all that much for a 3-person family. That's almost nothing. I don't know. I can't even imagine you being able to live in a building at that point. That's not enough to even have an apartment or anything in most places.
Right. Oh man. And what's also very interesting is when I was reading into the ratification of the Social Security Act and just social programs in the U.S. as we know it, Roosevelt, he left it up to the states in terms of what they do with the funds they receive federally for needy children, for widows, and for people with disabilities. And a big reason for that was he was pushed by southern states because they wanted to have more control over the amount of benefits that their black that the black people in those states would receive.
That
so it was racialized.
Right.
What was that?
It sounds about right.
Yeah.
If in America there's something racist about it.
Yeah, usually. In most things. It seems like in this country. And our past here, our history here in the United States is very much about racism in a lot of ways. And it goes to show you that back in the 1920s, during the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, where did the Nazis look for precedent for the kinds of horrible policies that they wanted to enact on people in their own country? They looked here. They looked to the United States. And they took a lot of the things that we were doing here over there. And there were times even that we went too far for even the Nazis, which is amazing. I believe there was this, right? That's crazy. But there was a policy in the United States, a one-drop policy, I believe is what it was called. And if you had one drop of African blood in you, you were considered African American or black. And so if you were considered black in America back then, you were a subclass citizen. And even today you can even consider that being the case in most places still in this country, it seems like, at the very least. So yeah, they were not good, the Americans. And at the time, one of Hitler's most fawning, one of the people that he fawned over the most, who he actually idolized, was Henry Ford, an American. And Henry Ford was very much a proponent of the Nazi regime, actually, at one point, before the war. They were actually friends in some ways. From what I've learned over the years here, there were a lot of people in America, and and other places that were actually fine with the Nazi Party. They thought it was pretty interesting what was going on there. Mm-hmm. Until, the war happened, and then everything changed, and everyone was like, oh yeah, we totally hate those guys. Yeah, we totally never really were friends with them. No, we did. What? Come on. And it's just really, really, really sad when you learn the truth of these things, unfortunately. But going back to these,
wait. Actually, before you do, I just have a interesting. I have a quote from Mein Kampf.
Oh, God.
Actually, I know.
Please go on.
He says, "Quote: Through modern technology and the communication it enables, international relations between peoples have become so effortless and intimate that Europeans, often without realizing it, take the circumstances of American life as the benchmark of their own lives." And actually,
you sure this was from Mein Kampf, or was it The Art of the Deal? Who knows? I'm not sure. For those who don't know, The Art of the Deal was Donald Trump's book. Just saying.
Okay, one more. Okay. The prospects for the German people are bleak. Neither the current living space nor the achieved through a restoration of the borders of 1914 permits us to lead a life comparable to that of the American people. That was an oddly written.
Yeah,
it was. It's basically saying we want to live like the Americans do.
Yeah.
Mind you, America was a powerhouse back then, wasn't it? Yeah. I suppose it still is.
In a lot of ways, it was. And, they really idolized the Americas, like the United States was definitely idolized by them. And, it was not just, our successful economy. It was also the racism that they also really liked about us.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Getting back to these other, things, what other social programs are there? Medicaid. There's Medicaid.
Didn't the Republicans cut CHIP recently?
Yeah.
Did they manage to get through the tax bill in the end?
Just to tell people what CHIP is. CHIP means Child Health Insurance Program. CHIP. CHIP. So, finish your point there, Mike. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I believe the Republicans cut that in the last tax bill, causing 12 million children to now lose their healthcare. Some of which might be picked up by their families. Some, who knows?
Probably not. They're probably going to be on crowdfunding websites, and that's the sad part about it right now. That's the only way most people can actually afford their healthcare is going to crowdfunding websites now.
Yeah,
that's the only
for
way.
Me,
it's
my healthcare over the last 6 years has cost somewhere in the region of $500,000, somewhere like that, between the kidneys failing and the transplant and everything. I don't exactly know what I'd do if I was America.
Yeah.
Oh man. So I just I kind of it's a lot, but like so yes, Republicans, Tories, they want to cut things in order to so that public approval can go down. Well, what's interesting is that in the U.S., this is a really bad time to cut social programs, specifically Medicare and Social Security. And I actually have a quote here, and it's from writer Eric B. Shore. Normally I wouldn't say the writer, but he made a really good article for The Atlantic, and it says, quote, "Since roughly the time the first boomers started retiring, the entitlement system has been paying out more in benefits than it takes in from dedicated payroll taxes. The total shortfall made up from general revenue currently comes to $311 billion. But after 2034, the trust fund reserves, which are the assets built up over the years for the boomers' retirement from their own contributions, will be fully depleted. And from then on, the system will run solely on payments from those in the workforce. And at current rates, these will be only enough to pay about 3/4 of scheduled benefits. Either taxes must go up or benefits must come down. And then he later adds a little bit more. When Social Security was launched, there were 42 workers paying Social Security and Medicare payroll taxes for each individual retiree. Today, that ratio has fallen to just under 3-1 and will fall again as the boomers retire. Every young couple today can expect to foot the bill for a boomer's retirement, not counting, of course, their own parents.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like you got a similar problem to we have with the aging population.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was a big baby boom, the boomers, and they're all getting retired now. So they're all getting old and needing to pay for and getting sick and being expensive and telling us how we don't work hard enough.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. Meanwhile, we're partially the reason for why they receive these for these benefits that they're receiving anyway.
Yeah.
What we contribute.
Though, to be fair, retired people in our country are pretty screwed along with everyone else. The Tories keep cutting the winter fuel payment, which is a benefit for old people to afford heating.
Wow.
Every year there's a number of people in this country who freeze to death in their homes because they can't afford to heat their houses, which is beyond shocking.
Yeah.
That was just downright evil.
Yeah. And when asked, okay, well, what are you going to do? But they say, well, put a jumper on and just choose one room to heat.
Wow.
What? Yeah, it's pretty bad, especially when a lot of these people are living in older houses which aren't as insulative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, that's pretty awful.
Something to say, Chris?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's just it's so fucking frustrating. All of this, like when it comes to the Social Security and everything, like we did say earlier, it was originally termed as a pension program for the elderly, but it's just welfare. It honestly is welfare. And I think the discussion that we really need to start having, though, is, about welfare itself. Should we have welfare? And I would assume the three of us here, at least, are going to say, yes, we should have welfare. Because, right. I mean...
Obviously.
Yeah. This is the thing. Obviously, it's not a pension program. You're not getting what you paid into it back or anything, because most of these people are taking more than they've put in their entire careers.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't actually mind that, though.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
I'm the same way on this, and I think it's important. If we want to have a society that, like, this going back to even, like, FDR's rhetoric, like, one of the things that he was pushing for was a livable wage for everyone, a situation where everyone could have a basic modicum of a life, and we have to start deciding as a nation, I guess, whether that is important to us or not. And it's really disturbing the turn that this country is having these days on that front. And it just seems like there's so many people that are so willing to allow millions of other people to just die in the streets, rather than help even just subsidize a basic level of decency for these people. And like there's still a lot of homeless people in this country that receive no benefits. Some of them do, but there's still a lot of people out there that are on the streets already that don't receive any benefits.
And homelessness has risen by about 50% since the Tories took power over here.
Jeez. Wow, that's
not a shock. But yeah, like...
No, it isn't.
Yeah. These people are just that. They're people, If we want to be decent folks, we need to care about even the poorest of society. I can't remember the quote like verbatim or anything. I believe it was from FDR. It was something around the lines of like, you know, a nation is only as good as like how well it treats its poor. Or it was something along those lines. I don't remember the quote exactly anymore.
Yeah, but it's like it's the test of our progress, or the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little.
Yeah. And that is something that to me is something worth spending money on. You know, like maybe spending more money on a war in Iraq or Iran or if Afghanistan or wherever the hell else we might start new wars in North Korea. Like maybe those expenses are less important than actually helping the people that are in this country.
Right. And I think a big part of it, we have to reform the way we look at welfare programs. And especially when it comes to the boomers. Now the boomers are overwhelmingly conservative. And a lot of them are incredulous in terms of what Republicans will do to them. It would do to the programs that they benefit from. And a lot of it is because they have to consider their programs welfare programs, because they're unaware of the fact that this isn't your money you're receiving. This is the pot of everyone contributing in this country, just so that you can have a medium life as when you as a retiree.
Modicum of life.
Yeah. A lot of them buy into it though. They say, "Well, they're not cutting my benefits; they're just cutting the welfare frauds. That's all they're doing. They're not going after my benefits." And then they're shocked when, of course, their benefits go down.
Yeah,
right.
They don't know that they take benefits. It's like, well, I don't take benefits. You get a child tax credit, yeah, but I don't get benefits. That's a benefit.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
And one thing that people over a certain age who happen to be conservative rallied against was the Affordable Care Act, and a big part of it was of course we know it wasn't what it is today isn't necessarily what it was intended when it started, which was to expand Medicare to encompass people slightly younger than 65 as well. And what people said was, what people who currently are beneficiaries said was, take your hands off my Medicare, off of my Medicare. As if like you're somehow special, like the money that you're receiving is your own. No one can take this from me. Don't expand this so more people can benefit. That just means more.
I just wish they'd have that attitude towards all of the other government services.
Right.
You want to defund my infrastructure? No, you're not doing that. You want to defund my schools? No, get your hands off my schools. I wish they'd have this attitude. I really wish they would.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's not the way it works anyway in this country. We are reaching the end of the show here, guys. We didn't get to some stats, like Medicaid. I have a small stat here, a few little tidbits here. There are 64.9 million recipients, or there were in, I believe, is 2016 for Medicaid. Of that 64.9, 29.5, or around a little bit less than half, which is the lion's share of all people on Medicaid, were children. 29.5 million of the people on Medicaid are children. 19.2 million are adults. Wow. And on top of that, Medicaid pays for around 40% of all American births in this country.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's Medicaid, another quote-unquote entitlement program. So 40% of all our births are paid for by this fund.
My God.
Let's go to food stamps. Supplemental, it's also called a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. 47.6 million recipients, 23 million households. This does cost the federal government $79.9 billion. The average person on food stamps gets about $133 per month.
Wow.
That's nothing.
That is nothing.
I mean, I remember when I was living with an ex of mine, we actually both went on to food stamps, and yeah, we didn't get much. It didn't cover a whole lot. I still also had to pay more out of my pocket from my earnings towards food and everything for the month. So yeah, it really wasn't much. There's also an earned income tax credit, which is an income tax credit that is geared towards families, I believe, mostly. And a family with one child in this tax credit must earn less than $51,561 a year to actually qualify for this. And so that means no one above that can be just gaming the system and getting this tax credit. 27 million people receive this benefit. The total cost of this program is about $63 billion, and that actually equates to about $2,335 per taxpayer. But this program did actually lift 6.5 million people, or million families, out of poverty. So that out of the 27 million recipients of it, 6.5 million of the families affected by this were helped lifted out of poverty by the earned income tax credit. So these things aren't just these programs that are just being defrauded by people. And like Michael even said in his instance, we sort of also talked about the lion's share of all of the fraud that is found is actually errors by the government itself. Right. In filing the paperwork, or someone put an extra zero somewhere they shouldn't have, and it paid out more than it should have. This is the main way that these programs have any kind of fraud in them. It's accidental fraud. Most people do not take this system like Linda Taylor did. Most people aren't that. I'm sure you can find a few people out there that do it, but I would rather a few people get away with gaming the system than cut millions of people's ability to feed themselves and their children. I think the trade-off is worth it.
Right. And so here's the thing. People may be asking themselves, what is the trade-off? The trade-off is, there's multiple different options, of course. One is you can keep things the way they are now, which, of course, like I read, the trust fund for boomers will become fully depleted by 2034. So we can't do that. But if we did, what's going to happen is probably it will just keep on adding to the debt that we already have.
We would have to raise taxes.
We would either have to raise taxes, which which in turn could possibly slow down the economy in terms of, people won't be as active in the economy if you raise their taxes, possibly. And, so I think that's the big thing. That's the message that a lot of us progressives would rather, that's what we would rather do. And of course it's a difficult decision either way, but we're dealing with lives here. So I would say that would probably be the best bet.
I'll note as well, every now and then there's a Tory politician, probably Republicans too, who I could live off well, what is it, £60 a week, no problem. And everyone's just, and the whole country's just like, do it then, and they never do.
Yeah, of course they
and
don't.
I just want to tell people, if you consider thinking I can live with that, it's fine. You just need to learn to budget, you need to learn to cook properly and stuff. Do it. Just go and do it.
Well, I don't have to, so therefore I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
So
get yourself in a council flat in the middle of some scummy city because you can't leave anywhere else. Sorry, the cat's in the shoebox again. Because you can't live anywhere else in some crappy part of town with a crappy dead-end job and 60 quid a week and see how long you last on it. You won't last long at all.
Right.
Yeah.
It's shit.
Yeah, and then that would be the result if they decrease the budget in federal aid programs, specifically for the older. And so yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yeah. It's
so, guys. I think we did a pretty decent job in terms of covering social federal aid programs.
It was all right. It was okay.
And I mean, it sounded like to me that you guys just made your closing statements, but
yeah.
If not, is there anything else you guys would like to say?
The usual thing, vote on it.
I have to say, left is best.
Left is best.
Left is best. That is my closing statement.
This is one of those issues where even Hillary had a solid plan of what to do about this. The Republicans just got nothing. This is one of those issues where the left is just objectively better than the right.
They never have plans. Like even with Obamacare, they pushed to repeal
7
Obamacare.
years.
Yeah, for 7 freaking years. They brought it up in the House, I believe, over 60 times, I think, to try and repeal it. And right when they got into office, they couldn't even do it because they don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't have any. They could have had 7 years of finding out. Okay, what are we going to replace it with? They had nothing. After 7 years of trying to repeal it, they had literally nothing in store of what they could actually replace it with. So that's why a few months back, last year, I guess, the repeal of Obamacare completely failed because they didn't know how to do it because they didn't have a plan. They don't work that far in advance, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
Yeah. Yep. So, and with that, guys, we did it. And Chris, actually, I didn't practice this part, so do you mind taking over?
Sad. Well, I mean, you guys could get in touch with us if you guys want. Message us on our email address, the evolutionofnow@gmail.com. You can send us your comments, criticisms, and all that, and suggestions, ideas for the show. Maybe even people that you think that would be cool for us to interview. That'd be awesome. Send us some suggestions there at our email at theevolutionofnow.com or .com. theevolutionofnow@gmail.com. And check us out on Facebook. Every week we post the link to the newest episode on there. If that makes it helpful for you guys, you can even reach out to us on there. Send us a post or something on there. And maybe someday I'll actually see it because I'm never on Facebook. But it's there. And we really need to start doing more with it. But yeah. In the coming year, I guess we'll really try and start doing more with it. But
probably should.
Yeah, probably. We also have a
Discord as well.
Yeah, we have a Discord which Jordan still hasn't joined. But
God.
what a
Guys,
jerk.
send me the invite. You need to send the invite.
We'll send it to you on our super secret Discord. We have a super secret one too.
I like
but it's a big secret, big league secret. But yeah, you guys can follow the link that will be in this podcast to our Discord. and you can talk to us there. And yeah, it would be cool to hear from you guys, you know. Also, there's another little website that we're on called Patreon. The Patreon website is pretty good. Patreon.com/theevolutionofnow is where we are situated there, and you can donate to the show. If you guys like our show and you want to hear more and you want us to interview more people going in the future, which we are definitely going to be doing soon. But, definitely send us a little bit of scratch if you are so inclined, if you have the ability to do so. It'll help us out, guys. Any little bit. Right now, I think we're up to like $5 a month still. which is better than nothing, that's for sure. But yeah. So yeah, thank you guys for showing up this week. Thank you, Jordan, for spearheading this operation this week.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had a blast.
And thanks, Michael, for showing up as well and giving us the UK rundown a little bit.
Actually showing up this week.
And that too, yeah. Unlike last week, but we're not going to talk about it anymore.
It'll be my topic next week, and I'm not completely sure what I'm doing yet.
Yeah. Well, we will keep you guys posted. Obviously, you will find out next week, I guess. All right. You guys have a great week.
Bye.
Fun.